In this section, we're going to cover Darwin's theory of evolution. Evolution is a core concept in biology that describes how living organisms evolve over time. Evolution helps us to summarize the history of the Earth. In 1831, Charles Darwin was only 22 years old. He worked as a naturalist and boarded the HMS Beagle. His mission was to expand the Navy's knowledge of natural resources, including food and water. He traveled to a number of foreign lands, and his initial observation was that the number of species found was much greater than what was originally thought. So many of Darwin's key observations were made by organisms found on the Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands are a series of volcanic islands off the coast of Ecuador. And here he found many unique species of plants and animals. And his first question he had was, how did so many different types of plants and animals arrive on this island in the first place? So a volcanic island initially would be not inhabited by any living organisms. So the tortoises that he found there, he theorized that maybe some changing currents could allow them to swim or float there, and that vegetation may have contained some reptiles or insects, and these branches could have broken off trees on the mainland and floated out to sea, and small insects such as spiders and spores from plants could have been blown there. These observations that Darwin had led him to believe that biological evolution occurs. And this was very contrary to the belief at the time. The pre-Darwinian view heavily was influenced by theology, and the idea was that all organisms were created simultaneously and that each organism is fixed and unchanged. The explorers, they collected many fossils The Earth is very old, much older than it was believed to be prior to Darwin's times. Amber is fossilized tree resin, and the oldest amber dates back to about 320 million years ago. There are at least 5 mass extinctions that have occurred on the planet Earth. One of them interest is the Permian extinction, which is the basis of the third lab that will be completed. That occurred about 248 million years ago, and it was caused by the eruption of volcanoes called the Siberian Traps. The Triassic extinction occurred about 208 million years ago, and this was caused by volcano eruption, other events, and the breaking up of the supercontinent Pangaea. The Cretaceous mass extinction occurred about 650 million years ago, and this caused the loss of the dinosaurs. Factors that contributed to this mass extinction were meteoroid impact and comet showers. Prior to Darwin's times, many scientists didn't notice that there were variations that occurred in organisms. Another researcher, Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck, contributed this change to the use and disuse of structure. So the use or disuse of a structure can bring about change over time. Based on his theory, originally all giraffes had short necks, and that giraffes stretched their necks in order to reach food. And with continually stretching, now we have giraffes that all have long necks. This theory, however, is not supported by modern genetics and is called the inheritance of acquired characteristic. Natural selection theorizes that originally giraffes' necks length varied, and that the struggle to exist caused long-necked giraffes to be able to survive and produce the most offspring. And due to this natural selection process of the longest-necked giraffes having the most offspring, now all giraffes have long necks. Darwin's conclusions were also based on the study of geology and fossils. Once Darwin accepted that the world was old, he began to think that there was time for descent with modification to occur. This is now what we refer to as evolution. the Earth is still changing, and not all of these major changes occur due to catastrophic events. The Earth is slowly, gradually changed by erosion, wind, and rain. If you look at the Grand Canyon, this was formed by water, ice, continental drift. The land in this part of the United States is baked and cannot absorb water. And so when rain does fall, it tends to be torrential and generates a flash flood. This caused erosion, which slowly produced the Grand Canyon. Some of Darwin's conclusions were based on biogeography. This is the study of the distribution of life forms on Earth. And he compared animals found in South America to those in England. He found enormous similarities between the South American Patagonia hare and that of the English rabbit. And he theorized because these two animals had adapted to the same type environment. Pangaea was one large continent that was formed by the merger of two supercontinents, Laurasia from the north and Gondwana from the south. This event occurred about 250 million years ago. About 200 million years ago, Pangaea began to break apart. Evidence of this exists if you look at the coastline of West Africa and East South America. They appear to fit together. Also, the same reptile fossils can be found in Africa and East South America. Darwin studied the biogeography of the organisms found on the Galapagos Islands. The species of organisms found here resemble those found on the mainland, though some were slightly different. Again, he wondered, where did they come from? And why are they different? Have they evolved? A particular interest to Darwin were the finches. Could these finches have descended from a mainland finch? Each of the different type of species was adapted to eating a different type of food. New finch species cannot interbreed with other species, and he found on the Galapagos Islands 15 unique species of finches. This slide shows the different types of beak shapes that were found on the finches on the Galapagos Islands. And he theorized that the beak of one of the original Keep in mind that the Galapagos Islands is a series of volcanic islands, and the habitat varies from one island to another. So adaptive radiation explains how one single ancestral species could evolve to form a variety of species, each adapted to the individual environment on one of the islands. He also noticed some differences in the tortoise, about 10 subspecies of tortoises. There were long-necked tortoises that were able to acquire food where it's scarce in very dry areas, and then short-necked tortoises, which were found in moist regions with the most abundant food. Natural selection describes the mechanism of evolution. There's no direct or anticipation of future needs. The environment may change, it may change subtly, and a variation that once offered an advantage may now increase survival. For natural selection to occur, it requires that members of a population all have heritable variations. Most species produce more offspring than can be supported. And those that have a particular trait better suited to their environment are the ones that will survive. Let's look at the example of sea stars, commonly known as starfish. Each sea star produces about 4 million offspring. However, most of the offspring are consumed by predators or die due to environmental assault. Natural selection states that individuals that have desired traits survive and reproduce more than individuals that lack these traits, and that over time, many generations, a larger percentage of the population will then have the more desired. Industrial melanism is an example of microevolution. So microevolution is when evolution occurs over a very short period of time, from 1 or 2 generations. And this occurred in moth population found in Europe at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So prior to the burning of, if you look closely here, here is a light-colored moth. And so you can see that on a light bark tree, the light-colored moth could very easily, escape detection by the birds. And so most of the moths within the population had the light color. Now see a tree that has picked up a lot of soot. Now the light-colored moths really stand out, and so there was a population shift very rapidly between the two variants of the species. Dogs are descended from wolves, and some breeds of dogs are so different that in the wild they would be viewed as different species. Humans have produced radically different dogs in a few thousand years by selectively breeding dogs for their individual traits. An example of this is bulldogs. Bulldogs have a very short face, and this contributes to sinus problems. They have long, slung, heavy-set bodies and very narrow pelvises. This narrow pelvis makes it very difficult for bulldogs to be able to deliver their young. Most bulldog pups have to be delivered by a C-section. Genetic mutations give rise to new variations among members of a species, and this allows natural selection to occur. Variations that exist within a population are due to mutations. Mutations are inheritable changes in DNA. Sexual reproduction passes traits on from the parents to the offspring. Some mutations are very harmful, such as hemophilia. This is a genetically inherited disorder that involves the absence of clotting factor needed for hemostasis, or the stoppage of bleeding. However, in giraffes, having a longer neck allows that particular giraffe to reach more leaves and be able to obtain more food. Organisms vary in their fitness. Fitness is determined by comparing the number of surviving, fertile offspring produced by each member of a population. What determines fitness varies for each population. A population's interaction with the environment determines its fitness.